At 1:07 a.m., Claire Bennett was still sitting beside room 614's dying patient 6 hours after her shift had ended. Her phone glowed beside a cold cup of coffee, 3 missed calls from Noah's babysitter, a bank balance of $43.18, and a message from her supervisor telling her to leave. But Claire stayed. On the bedside table, an old wooden metronome whispered into the darkness. Tick, tick, tick. Margaret Whitmore barely had enough strength to squeeze Claire's hand. "Will you stay until it stops?" Claire pulled her chair closer. 2 days later, a black sedan stopped outside St. Catherine Medical Center. A powerful CEO walked into the lobby carrying that same metronome. "Where is the nurse who stayed with my mother? Before we continue, tell us what country you're watching from and your local time. And if stories about overlooked people matter to you, subscribe and stay with us." At 5:19 the next morning, 36 hours before the black sedan would pull beneath the awning of St. Catherine Medical Center. Claire Bennett woke 3 minutes before her alarm. She always did. The apartment was still dark, except for the yellow light above the stove in the narrow kitchen. Outside, West Baltimore was beginning to stir beneath a gray February sky. A city bus sighed at the corner. Somewhere upstairs, pipes knocked behind an old wall. Claire slipped out of bed quietly and pulled on her navy scrubs. At 32, she had learned how to move through mornings without wasting anything. Not water, not food, not money, and especially not time. On the kitchen table sat 3 envelopes. BGE, car insurance, rent. Claire opened the electric bill, read the red number printed near the bottom, then folded it twice and slid it beneath the sugar jar. Not today. She poured instant coffee into a chipped blue mug and opened the refrigerator. 2 eggs, half a gallon of milk, cheddar, a nearly empty jar of strawberry jam. Enough. She packed a turkey sandwich for her 8-year-old son, Noah, then made herself one and wrapped it in foil. A small voice came from behind her. "You forgot the mustard." Claire turned. Noah Bennett stood in the kitchen doorway wearing dinosaur pajama pants and 1 sock. His curls were flattened on one side from sleep. "You're supposed to be in bed. You say that every morning, and somehow you keep ignoring me." He smiled. Claire kissed his forehead. "Go brush your teeth." Noah started away, then stopped. "Mom." "Yeah, is the car still sick?" Claire glanced through the window toward the parking lot. Her faded silver 2008 Honda Accord sat beneath a street lamp. "She's dramatic," Claire said. "That's different." Noah considered this seriously. Like Aunt Renee, Claire pressed her lips together to keep from laughing. "Brush your teeth." While Noah disappeared down the hallway, Claire opened her banking app. $86.42. Rent was due in 4 days. The mechanic had quoted her $487 for an alternator. She closed the app. There were problems you could solve, and problems you could only keep walking beside until something changed. For now, the Honda belonged to the second category. At 6:03, Claire tied her shoes. The sole of her right nursing shoe had begun separating near the toe. She had repaired it the night before with adhesive and wrapped a rubber band around it while it dried. It would hold. Probably. Noah came into the kitchen dressed for school and watched her put on her coat. "You gonna eat? I packed lunch." "That wasn't my question." Claire looked at him, 8 years old and already too observant. "I'll eat." Noah nodded, unconvinced. When Claire turned to grab her keys, he quietly opened the pantry, took out a package of peanut butter crackers, and slipped it into the side pocket of her work bag. Claire saw him in the reflection of the microwave door. She pretended she hadn't. "Come on," she said. "Ms. Renee's waiting downstairs." By 6:21, Claire had dropped Noah with her sister and was sitting behind the wheel of the Honda. She turned the key. Click. Nothing. "Come on, sweetheart." She tried again. Click, click. Claire rested her forehead against the steering wheel. Then she tried a 3rd time. The engine coughed, shuddered, and finally started. There you go. She patted the dashboard. Drama. St. Catherine Medical Center rose 12 stories above North Baltimore, a block of glass and pale concrete that never truly slept. Claire parked in the employee lot at 6:47. Her shift began at 7:30. She entered the building at 6:49, 11 minutes early, always 11. Years earlier, Daniel Bennett had noticed it. Daniel had been a paramedic, the kind who kept granola bars in every jacket because someone was always hungry. He used to leave home early enough to irritate Claire. One morning when she asked why he refused to arrive anywhere on time like a normal person, he had smiled. If you arrive early, somebody gets to breathe easier. Daniel had been gone 3 years now. Claire still arrived 11 minutes early. Some habits survived because letting them go felt too much like losing the person twice. The 6th floor nurses' station was already buzzing. Phones rang. A patient called for assistance. A transport aide pushed an empty wheelchair past 2 residents arguing quietly over lab results. Claire had barely removed her coat when Patricia Collins approached holding a tablet. Patricia was 48, efficient, exhausted, and capable of turning 3 simultaneous emergencies into a checklist. Morning. You saw the new assignments? Not yet. Patricia handed her the tablet. Claire scanned the screen, then scanned it again. 7 PulseGrid says Acuity supports it. PulseGrid doesn't have feet. Patricia gave her a tired look. Please don't start. I'm not starting. I'm counting. So is PulseGrid. That was precisely the problem. St. Catherine had introduced PulseGrid 6 weeks earlier, an optimization platform designed to predict staffing needs using patient acuity medication schedules, discharge estimates, historical workload, and dozens of other variables. Administration loved it. There were presentations about efficiency, emails about resource utilization, charts showing reduced labor hours. But Claire had noticed something the charts didn't show. Nurses no longer sat down. A 5-minute conversation became a luxury. A frightened patient asking the same question 3 times became a delay. A lonely person who wanted someone to listen became something no column on the dashboard knew how to count. Claire handed the tablet back. I asked for Saturday overtime. Denied. I know, then why mention it? Because apparently we're short enough for 7 patients, but not short enough to pay me Saturday. Patricia lowered her voice. That decision came from upstairs. Claire immediately regretted the sharpness in hers. Patricia looked as tired as everyone else. I know, sorry. Patricia nodded once. Room 602 needs antibiotics at 7:30. 607 has a discharge pending. 611's daughter calls every 20 minutes. And you're picking up 614. What's 614? Patricia glanced at the screen. Margaret Whitmore, 71. Pancreatic cancer, palliative. Dr. Carter's following, family none here. That answer stayed with Claire. Not because it was unusual, because it wasn't. The morning disappeared into motion. Medication, charting, a confused patient trying to remove an IV, a daughter crying in the hallway because her father no longer recognized her. At 10:14, Claire realized she had not used the bathroom. At 11:36, she realized she had not eaten. At 12:08, reaching for a pen inside her work bag, her fingers touched something crinkly. Peanut butter crackers. Claire stopped. For a second, in the middle of fluorescent lights and ringing phones, she smiled. Thanks, Noah, she whispered. She ate 2 crackers standing at the nurse's station. Then room 607 needed her. It was nearly 2:00 when Claire finally reached room 614. She knocked softly. No answer. Claire opened the door. The room felt different from the others. No television, no flowers, no balloons tied to a chair, no family photographs taped beside the bed. An elderly black woman sat upright near the window beneath a pale hospital blanket. Her silver-streaked hair was neatly braided back, and despite the oxygen cannula beneath her nose, there was something composed about her. Her eyes moved toward Claire. You're late? Claire paused. I'm sorry. The woman nodded toward the clock. I've been waiting to see how long it would take somebody to notice I stole an extra applesauce. Claire stared at her. Then Margaret smiled. Claire laughed before she could stop herself. I'm Claire. Margaret! Claire stepped closer. That was when she noticed the object on the bedside table, an old wooden metronome. Its polished surface was scratched from years of use. The pendulum moved steadily from side to side. Tick, tick, tick. Claire looked at it. Margaret followed her gaze. Most people ask about that before they ask how I'm feeling. I was going to ask both. Good answer. Claire checked Margaret's IV line and oxygen saturation. What's it for? Margaret watched the pendulum swing. For remembering. Remembering what Margaret looked toward the empty chair beside her bed. For the first time, the humor disappeared from her face. That time is only useful if you give it to somebody. The metronome continued counting. Tick, tick, tick. And Claire Bennett had no idea that before this night was over, she would give Margaret Whitmore 6 hours she could not afford to lose. By 2:17 p.m., Claire Bennett had learned 3 things about Margaret Whitmore. She hated vanilla pudding. She could identify a badly tuned piano from across a building, and she did not like being called sweetheart by anyone under 70. Claire discovered the last one when a young nursing assistant leaned through the doorway and asked, "You doing okay, sweetheart?" Margaret waited until the woman disappeared. If she calls me sweetheart again, I'm putting her in my will just so I can remove her. Claire almost dropped the blood pressure cuff. You're Trouble. I taught middle school for 34 years. Trouble and I are old colleagues. That was how Claire learned Margaret had been a music teacher. Not at a conservatory, not at some expensive private academy. Baltimore public schools. 34 years of children arriving with broken pencils, untied shoes, empty stomachs, complicated homes, and occasionally enough musical talent to frighten themselves. Margaret had taught general music during school hours and piano afterward. Most couldn't afford lessons, she said. So you taught them for free, I taught them for cookies. Claire raised an eyebrow. Inflation must have been rough, terrible. By retirement, I was charging 2 Oreos. Margaret smiled. Claire smiled back. Then her pager vibrated. Room 602. Claire glanced toward the door. Margaret noticed. Go, I'll be back. People always say that in hospitals. Claire stopped. There was no accusation in Margaret's voice. That made it worse. I will. Claire left. The next 90 minutes disappeared. A medication order changed in 602. Room 611's daughter wanted the physician called again. A patient in 609 vomited across the floor seconds after insisting he felt perfectly fine. At 3:52, Claire returned to room 614. Margaret was exactly where she had left her, alone. The metronome continued moving beside the bed. Tick, tick, tick. You came back, Margaret said. Told you. You want a medal, I'd settle for a chair. Margaret pointed toward the visitor chair. Luxury accommodations. Claire sat for exactly 40 seconds while checking Margaret's chart. She noticed the untouched pudding cup. You really do hate vanilla. It tastes like someone described happiness to a potato. Claire laughed. She lifted Margaret's meal tray and noticed something odd. 3 sugar packets had been tucked beneath a napkin. You saving these? Yes. For what retirement? You're already retired. Then I'm ahead of schedule. Claire let it go. She checked the room again. There were no cards on the windowsill. No coat draped over the visitor chair. No charger plugged into the wall for somebody staying overnight. Most tellingly, there were no photographs. Terminal rooms usually accumulated evidence that someone belonged somewhere. A granddaughter taped to a wall. A wedding picture. A plastic grocery bag filled with clean socks. A half-finished crossword left by a spouse. Room 614 had none of it. Claire glanced at the chart. Emergency contact Jonathan Whitmore. Relationship son. There was a phone number. Do you want me to call anyone? Margaret's eyes remained on the window. No. Your chart lists your son. My chart is nosy. Claire waited. Margaret finally looked at her. He knows I'm sick. Does he know you're here? A pause. He knows enough. Claire had been a nurse long enough to recognize a locked door when she found one. She did not push. All right? Margaret seemed almost surprised. You're not going to give me a speech about family? No. Why not? Because I met you this afternoon. That earned another small smile. Reasonable woman. Claire stood. Her phone vibrated inside her pocket. A hospital notification. Overtime restrictions remain in effect. All non-approved hours require supervisor authorization. She locked the screen. Margaret had seen her face change. Bad news? Work. You're at work. That's why it's bad news. Margaret chuckled, then winced. Claire immediately moved closer. Pain. 5. Before medication 7. Claire checked the schedule. You're due. As she prepared the medication, Margaret watched her. You have children 1, boy or girl boy? Noah, 8. 8 is a dangerous age. How they still love you enough to tell you the truth. Claire thought about Noah, asking whether she planned to eat. That sounds accurate. Margaret nodded toward Claire's right shoe. The repaired sole had begun separating again, and apparently your shoes tell the truth too. Claire looked down. They're fine. They're surrendering. They've threatened that before. Stubborn. The shoe's you. Before Claire could answer, someone knocked. Angela Morris pushed a housekeeping cart into the room. She was in her mid-50s with tired eyes and the easy manner of someone who had spent years becoming invisible in other people's rooms. There she is, Margaret said. Angela pointed at her. You behaved today. Absolutely not. I figured. Angela emptied the trash and wiped the counter. Margaret reached beneath her napkin and held out the 3 sugar packets. Your coffee emergency fund. Angela stopped. You saved those hospital coffee needs medical intervention. Angela took the packets, laughing. You're ridiculous, and yet you came back. Angela's smile softened. Yeah? I did. For a moment, Claire watched them. A dying woman saving sugar for a housekeeper. A housekeeper taking 30 seconds to ask how the dying woman was feeling. Nothing about it would appear in Pulse Grid. No metric would register it. But the room felt less empty. After Angela left, Claire looked at the metronome. How long have you had that Margaret turned toward it? 42 years. That thing survived hundreds of children. Impressive. More impressive than surviving adults. Margaret reached over and touched the wooden casing. I used it with nervous students, especially the ones terrified of making mistakes. What did it do? Nothing. Claire frowned. Margaret smiled. That was the point. It just kept going. They'd hit the wrong note panic look at me, and that little thing kept ticking. The pendulum moved. Tick, tick, tick. I used to tell them, as long as you can hear it, you're not alone. Claire looked at Margaret. Something in the older woman's voice had changed. It was no longer a teacher remembering students. It was a frightened person borrowing an old lesson for herself. Claire pulled the visitor chair slightly closer. Margaret noticed, but said nothing. At 4:46, Dr. Samuel Carter entered. He examined Margaret, asked several questions, then reviewed the newest lab results. His expression barely changed. Claire saw it anyway. When he finished, he asked her to step into the hallway. The door clicked softly behind them. Dr. Carter removed his glasses. She's declining faster than we expected. How fast hours, maybe? I'd be surprised if she makes it through tomorrow. Claire looked through the narrow glass panel in the door. Margaret sat alone beside the window. The metronome continued swinging. Does her son know I called the number in the chart yesterday? Voicemail. Again, I can try. Claire nodded. Behind the glass, Margaret turned her head. For 1 second, her eyes met Claire's. She knew. Maybe not the number of hours. Maybe not the medical details. But she knew. Claire checked the time. 4:51 p.m., her shift ended at 7. Noah would be waiting. The babysitter charged extra after 7:30. Her car might not start. Her bank account was shrinking. And inside room 614, an old wooden metronome kept counting down minutes nobody yet understood were almost gone. Tick, tick, tick. At 6:41 p.m., Claire Bennett had 19 minutes left on her shift, and 4 things still unfinished. Room 602 needed a final antibiotic check. Room 607's discharge papers required a signature. Room 611's daughter wanted to speak with Dr. Carter again. And room 614 was dying. Claire stood at the nurse's station typing with one hand while holding the phone against her shoulder. "No, Ms. Harris, I understand," she said. "I already paged him." "Yes, I'll ask again." Her personal phone vibrated beside the keyboard. "Renee." Claire let it ring. She finished the chart called Dr. Carter, then checked the message. "Noah ate dinner. Homework done. You still picking him up at 7:30? Claire typed yes, leaving at 7. Before she could send it, Patricia Collins appeared. "Claire, what, your relief nurse is delayed." Claire stopped typing. "How delayed? Emergency on 5. How long? I don't know." Claire stared at her. Patricia raised both hands. "I know. My son is waiting. I know. I can't stay late tonight. I know." Claire hated those 2 words because Patricia did know. Everyone knew. That was what made it worse. There simply weren't enough people. Claire sent Renee a different message. "Running a little late. I'll call you." Then she returned to work. At 6:53, Claire entered room 6114. Margaret Whitmore was awake. The old metronome continued its steady rhythm beside her. Tick, tick, tick. "You're still here," Margaret murmured. "For 7 more minutes. Counting always. Dangerous habit." Claire checked her oxygen saturation. Lower. Her breathing had changed to shallower, less regular. You hurting? Not much. Nauseous? No. Claire adjusted the blanket. Margaret watched her. "You have somewhere to be." "My son." "Then go. My replacement isn't here yet." "Sounds like somebody else's organizational failure." Claire smiled despite herself. "You really were a teacher. 34 years. I recognize poor planning." At exactly 700, Claire's phone vibrated again. "Patricia, relief nurse still delayed. Need 15-20 min?" Claire exhaled. Margaret closed her eyes. Then suddenly opened them. Her hand gripped the blanket. Claire saw the change immediately. Margaret. The older woman tried to inhale. Nothing deep enough came. Her chest tightened. Claire moved fast. She raised the head of the bed, checked the oxygen line, and called for assistance. "Margaret, look at me." Margaret's eyes widened. "I can't. You can. Stay with me." Claire increased the oxygen according to the standing comfort care order. Dr. Carter entered moments later with another nurse. Medication was administered. There was no frantic resuscitation. Margaret's care plan was clear. Comfort, dignity, no aggressive intervention. But knowledge did not make fear disappear. Claire stayed close. Slow breath. Margaret reached blindly. Claire gave her a hand. The fingers closed around hers. Gradually the panic eased. Her breathing remained fragile, but the terror in her eyes softened. Dr. Carter checked her again. He looked at Claire. Both understood. The window was narrowing. When he left, Margaret did not release Claire's hand. "I thought I was ready," she whispered. Claire sat beside her. "You don't have to be." Margaret stared toward the doorway. "Funny. What you spend all this time pretending death is the frightening part." Claire waited. Margaret swallowed. "It isn't." What is Margaret's voice became almost inaudible, everybody leaving before it happens. Claire felt something tighten beneath her ribs. The empty chair, the blank windowsill, no photographs, no overnight bag, no family member asleep with their head against the wall. Claire looked toward the metronome. Tick, tick, tick. Margaret. "Yes, your chart lists Jonathan." Margaret closed her eyes. My son. Would you like me to call him No? Okay. Margaret opened her eyes again. You're not going to argue no. You nurses usually argue? We save that for doctors. A faint smile appeared, then vanished. He and I haven't spoken properly in almost 6 years. Claire said nothing. I know what you're thinking. You don't. That 6 years is a long time, it is. Margaret looked surprised by the direct answer. Claire continued softly. But I don't know what happened, so I don't get to tell you what 6 years means. Margaret turned toward the window. He knows I'm sick. Okay. I don't want death to be the thing that forces him through that door. Claire understood more than Margaret knew. Some goodbyes came because people chose them. Others came because time made the choice first. At 7:18, Claire's phone rang. Renee. She stepped into the hallway. Hey, you coming? Claire looked through the glass at Margaret. I'm stuck. A pause. How long, I don't know. Claire, I have an early shift tomorrow. I know, I'm sorry. Noah's voice sounded faintly in the background. Is that Mom? Claire closed her eyes. Renee lowered her voice. I can keep him, but you know I've got to charge you after 7:30. I'm already short this week. I understand. You sure? Claire opened her banking app. $43.18 available after pending charges. She stared at the number. How much if I'm there by 10, Claire? Just to tell me. 35. Almost everything she had available. Claire looked back at room 614. I'll figure it out. She ended the call. Patricia was standing several feet away. You need to go home. My relief. Here now. Claire nodded. Good. And no overtime, Claire. Administration sent another reminder this afternoon. I know, I mean it. Claire returned to the nurse's station and completed handoff carefully. Medication, pain management, oxygen, comfort orders, changes in respiration, Dr. Carter's instructions. She documented everything. Then at 7:31 p.m., Claire logged out. Her paid shift was over. She put on her coat. Patricia saw her and visibly relaxed. Good night. Night? Claire walked toward the elevator. She pressed the button. The doors opened. Inside, a hospital transporter stood beside an empty wheelchair. Claire stepped forward, then stopped. From down the corridor came the faint sound she could now recognize without seeing it. Tick, tick, tick. Claire thought of Noah waiting at Renee's apartment. The $35, the broken alternator, the rent, her repaired shoes. Daniel. And a young EMT who 3 years earlier had sat beside a dying paramedic he barely knew because Claire had not reached the hospital in time. The elevator doors began closing. Claire put out her hand. They opened again. You coming? The transporter asked. Claire looked down the corridor. No. She stepped backward. The elevator left without her. Patricia saw Claire remove her coat. What are you doing? My shift is over. Exactly. So I'm not staying as staff. Claire. My handoff is complete. I'm clocked out. I'm not touching her chart unless the assigned nurse asks me to. Patricia stared at her. Then what are you doing? Claire looked toward room 614. Visiting. She walked back inside. Margaret opened her eyes when Claire entered. You missed your escape? Elevator malfunction? Margaret looked toward the perfectly functioning elevator visible through the doorway. Terrible hospital. The worst. Claire pulled the visitor chair close to the bed. This time she did not check the clock. Margaret watched her sit. You don't have to do this. I know. Your son is waiting. He's safe. Your job, I clocked out. Margaret's eyes filled with something Claire could not name. Gratitude, perhaps. Or grief that gratitude was necessary at all. Claire rested her hands in her lap. I'm not your nurse right now. What are you? Claire looked at the empty chair, then at Margaret. Just Claire. The metronome moved between them. Tick, tick, tick. And at 7:36 p.m., with $43 in her account and a child waiting across town, Claire Bennett gave a dying stranger the first minute of 6 hours that belonged entirely to her. At 7:48 p.m., Margaret Whitmore asked Claire Bennett the last question Claire expected from a dying woman. "Does your boy eat broccoli?" Claire looked up. "What's your son? Noah. Under protest. Good. Good children who willingly eat broccoli are suspicious." Claire laughed. It felt almost inappropriate in room 614. Almost. Margaret's breathing had settled after the frightening episode, though every breath still required visible effort. The lights had been dimmed. Beyond the window, Baltimore had turned into scattered rectangles of white and amber against the February darkness. The metronome continued beside them. Tick, tick, tick. Claire had expected death to dominate the conversation. Instead, Margaret wanted to know about grilled cheese. "He'd eat grilled cheese every night if I let him," Claire said. "Reasonable child. He thinks ketchup is a vegetable. Also reasonable. He puts it on scrambled eggs." Margaret's face tightened. "I withdraw my support." Claire smiled. For several minutes, they talked about nothing important, and somehow that made everything important. Margaret told Claire about a 7th-grade student who had once hidden sheet music inside a ceiling tile because he had not practiced. Another student had pretended her fingers were injured. All 10, all 10. Ambitious. She forgot and opened a bag of chips in front of me. Claire shook her head. Rookie mistake. The stories came slowly. Margaret occasionally stopped to breathe, and Claire never rushed to fill the silence. For once, she didn't have to. She was not watching a medication timer, not calculating how long she had been in the room, not mentally listing 6 other patients. She was simply listening. At 8:13, Claire's phone vibrated. A picture from Renee. Noah was sitting at the kitchen table with a pencil behind his ear, making a ridiculous face at the camera. Underneath, Renee had written, "Homework done. He says you owe him pancakes." Claire stared at the picture a moment longer than necessary. Margaret noticed. That him, Claire showed her. Margaret studied the screen. "He has your eyes. He has his father's talent for negotiation. Where is his father?" The question was gentle. Claire locked the phone. Gone. Margaret waited. Claire could have left it there. Usually she did. People heard widow and immediately changed their faces. Their voices softened. Their questions became careful. Claire hated the moment when she stopped being Claire and became the woman whose husband died. But Margaret did not offer sympathy. She simply waited. "Daniel was a paramedic," Claire finally said. Margaret glanced at her. The 11 minutes man. Claire frowned. "I heard you tell someone earlier that you're always 11 minutes early. You listen too much. Occupational hazard. Teachers are professional eavesdroppers." Claire leaned back. "Daniel was always early, for everything." "That sounds annoying." It was. Margaret smiled. "He used to say, if you arrive early, somebody gets to breathe easier." The smile slowly left Claire's face. He believed time belonged to whoever needed it most. Margaret looked at the metronome. What happened? Claire rubbed her thumb against a loose thread on her scrub pants. 3 years ago, there was a crash on I-95. She had told the story before, to insurance people, to counselors, to hospital administrators. But facts were easier than memory. Daniel's ambulance stopped for a collision. Another vehicle lost control. Claire paused. He was hit. Margaret said nothing. He was conscious when they transported him. They called me at work. Claire could still remember the fluorescent hallway where she had answered. The physician's voice. The sound of a supply cart rolling past while her entire life split into before and after. I left immediately. How far away? 27 minutes on a good day. Margaret understood. You didn't make it. Claire shook her head. No. The word was small. 3 years later, it still hurt like something sharp. I got there 14 minutes after he died. Margaret closed her eyes briefly. Claire continued before sympathy could enter the room. There was an EMT with him. Kevin Lewis, 24 years old. She remembered Kevin sitting outside the trauma room, Daniel's blood dried on his sleeve. He'd only worked with Daniel twice. Claire swallowed, but he stayed. Margaret looked at her. Until the end. Yeah. Claire stared toward the dark window. Kevin told me Daniel kept asking whether I knew what happened. He kept worrying I'd think he had just disappeared. Her voice weakened. Kevin told him I knew. He didn't actually know whether anyone had reached me yet. He just told Daniel what he needed to hear. Margaret's eyes glistened. He held his hand. Claire nodded. Daniel died holding the hand of somebody who barely knew him. The metronome filled the silence. Tick, tick, tick. I used to think about that kid all the time, Claire said. Kevin? Did you ever see him again once, at the funeral? What did he say? Claire remembered perfectly. He said I couldn't save him, but I could make sure he didn't leave alone. Margaret turned her face toward the ceiling. That's why you stayed. Claire looked at her. Margaret continued. Not because I'm charming. You are moderately charming. Generous assessment. Claire smiled faintly. No, that's not why. Then why? Claire considered the question. I spent 3 years wishing I could repay Kevin. Did you know why? Because he never wanted anything. Margaret nodded slowly. Claire looked at their hands resting near each other on the blanket. Maybe some things aren't supposed to be paid back. Margaret turned toward her. Maybe they're supposed to be passed on. Claire said nothing. She didn't need to. At 8:41, Patricia appeared at the doorway. She looked at Claire, then at Margaret. You're still here? I am, Claire. I meant what I said about liability. I'm not providing medical care. The assigned nurse knows, yes. Patricia sighed. You're impossible. I've heard that. Your kid with my sister, your car hopefully still attached to the parking lot. Patricia almost smiled. Almost. Don't stay all night. Claire glanced at Margaret. I'm not planning to. But neither woman looked convinced. Patricia left. Margaret watched the doorway. You're spending money to sit here. That's a rude way to describe my company. I'm serious. So am I. You have a child. He's safe. You have bills. Claire looked sharply at her. Margaret pointed weakly toward Claire's shoe. Your footwear has been giving testimony all afternoon. Claire tucked the separating sole beneath the chair. Traitor. Margaret smiled. Then her expression changed. Not physically at first. Something simply retreated behind her eyes. Claire recognized it. There was another conversation waiting. One Margaret had been circling all evening. At 8:57, Margaret reached toward the bedside drawer. Claire helped open it. Inside was a phone. Margaret stared at it but did not pick it up. Jonathan, Claire asked. Margaret nodded. My son. The metronome clicked steadily. You want to call him? Margaret's fingers tightened slightly against the blanket. I don't know. That's okay. He was a good boy. Claire waited. I wasn't always a good mother. You raised him. That isn't the same thing. Margaret turned toward Claire. Fear was there again. But this time it was not fear of dying. It was fear of what death might make permanent. Claire. Yeah, Margaret looked at the phone, then at the empty chair beside her. Her voice trembled. Do you think a mother can apologize too late? The metronome moved once, tick. Claire did not answer immediately, because for the first time that evening she understood Margaret Whitmore was not asking whether she had enough time left to die. She was asking whether she had enough time left to tell the truth. Claire Bennett did not answer Margaret's question right away. Outside room 614, a cart rattled down the corridor. Somewhere near the nurse's station, a phone rang twice before someone answered it. Inside the room, the old wooden metronome kept moving as if nothing important had been asked. Tick, tick, tick. Do you? Margaret whispered. Claire leaned forward. Do I think a mother can apologize too late? Margaret nodded. I think people can wait too long. Margaret looked away. But that's not the same as saying it's too late. For several seconds, Margaret watched the lights beyond the window. My husband's name was Robert. Claire remained quiet. He was the kind of man who carried aspirin in 3 different pockets, but never remembered where he put his glasses. A faint smile crossed Margaret's face. Jonathan worshipped him. Your son, my only one. Margaret took a shallow breath. Robert had heart trouble for years. Nothing dramatic at first. Medication, appointments, warnings he pretended not to hear. Claire knew that type of patient. He needed a procedure eventually. His cardiologist told him not to postpone it, but he did. Margaret nodded. I had surgery. Her fingers tightened around the blanket. Not cancer. Not then. Hip surgery. Complications afterward. Robert stayed home with me. He delayed his procedure 6 weeks. Margaret swallowed. He kept saying he'd reschedule when I could manage the stairs alone. Claire already knew how the story ended. He never got 6 weeks, no. Margaret stared at the metronome. He collapsed in our kitchen. Her voice grew quieter. Jonathan was the one who found him. Claire felt the weight of that sentence. How old was Jonathan? 31. Old enough to understand death. Young enough to believe somebody must be responsible for it. He blamed you, Claire said softly. Margaret gave a tired smile. Not at first. After Robert's funeral, Jonathan had stayed close. He had handled paperwork, repaired a leaking faucet, filled Margaret's refrigerator, and called every evening. But grief changed shape when nobody was watching. Jonathan began working longer hours. Margaret became angry that he was never home. Jonathan became angry that his mother spoke about Robert as though his death had simply happened. Then came the argument. What did you say? Claire asked. Margaret closed her eyes. I told him he was becoming a man his father wouldn't recognize. Claire winced. And he told me his father might still be alive if he hadn't spent his life taking care of me. The words seemed to remain in the room years after they had first been spoken. What happened after that? He left. For 6 years. No, Margaret shook her head. He left for 3 days. Claire waited. He called on the 4th. You answered. No? Why pride? Jonathan called again a week later. Margaret let it ring. She told herself he needed to apologize first. Then Margaret called him a month later. Jonathan was in a meeting. He sent a message saying he would call back. He did not. 2 people who loved each other began keeping score. 1 missed call became evidence. 1 unanswered message became permission to remain silent. Weeks turned into months. Months hardened into years. I wrote him every birthday, Margaret said. You sent the letters number Christmas, those 2. Sent Margaret, looked at Claire. What do you think? Claire almost smiled. You're stubborn, so I've been told. By Jonathan, by everyone with functional eyesight. Claire sat back. What does he do? Healthcare technology. Margaret said it casually. Claire had no reason to connect the name Whitmore to anything larger. He built a company. You proud of him? Margaret's eyes softened. Terribly. Did you tell him no? There it was again. The tragedy was not absence of love. It was love left untranslated. Margaret's phone remained in the drawer. Claire reached over and placed it on their blanket. Margaret stared at it. What am I supposed to say? The truth? Which truth? The one you've been avoiding for 6 years? Margaret gave a weak laugh. That's a lot of truth. Then start small. What if he doesn't answer? Then leave a message. What if he does? Claire paused. That scares you more, doesn't it? Margaret's eyes filled. Yes. Claire understood. An unanswered call allowed hope to survive. A voice on the other end could destroy it. Margaret pushed the phone slightly away. I can't fix 6 years tonight. No. Claire's answer came immediately. Margaret looked at her. You don't have to fix 6 years tonight. Claire moved the phone back within reach. You can just tell the truth for 60 seconds. Margaret stared at her. 60? You were a music teacher. Surely you can survive 60 seconds. Depends on the tempo. Claire glanced toward the metronome. Want me to make it faster? Don't you dare. They both laughed. Margaret's laughter turned into a cough. Claire instinctively started to rise, then remembered she was no longer the assigned nurse. She pressed the call button instead. The night nurse entered, assessed Margaret, and adjusted her comfort medication according to the order. Claire stayed out of the way. When the nurse left, Margaret looked embarrassed. I hate this. What needing people? Claire shook her head. That's not weakness. Easy for nurses to say, not really. Claire thought of the electric bill beneath the sugar jar, the Honda, the babysitting money, all the things she kept trying to carry alone. Some of us are terrible at taking our own advice. Margaret smiled. At 9:24, Claire's phone buzzed. Renee had sent another message. Noah asleep soon. Don't worry, I've got him. Claire typed, thank you. Then another notification appeared. Low balance alert. She dismissed it before Margaret could see. But Margaret had seen enough. You should go home. We've discussed this. You can still change your mind. So can you. Claire nodded toward Margaret's phone. Margaret narrowed her eyes. Sneaky. Professional skill. For several minutes, neither woman moved. Then Margaret picked up the phone. Her hand trembled so badly that Claire steadied the bottom of it without taking control. Margaret opened Jonathan's contact. A photograph appeared. A handsome black man in a dark suit standing somewhere outdoors, smiling slightly, as though someone had caught him between serious moments. Margaret touched the picture. That was 4 years ago. How'd you get it, Internet? Claire raised an eyebrow. I'm old Claire. I'm not Amish. Claire laughed. Margaret almost did too. Her thumb hovered over the call button, then moved away. I can't hear his voice. Okay, I'll lose my nerve. Then don't call. Margaret looked confused. Claire tapped the voice recording icon. Leave him something he can hear when you're ready for him to hear it. Margaret stared at the red circle. The metronome continued beside her. Tick, tick, tick. What if I say the wrong thing? Claire looked at her. You already spent 6 years trying not to. Margaret absorbed that. Then she pressed record. A red timer appeared. 0001. Margaret opened her mouth. Nothing came. 0004. Claire remained perfectly still. 0007. Margaret swallowed. Jonathan? Her voice cracked. She stopped the recording. For a second, Claire thought she would delete it. Instead, Margaret listened to that single word. Her son's name, spoken without anger for the first time in years. Then she looked at Claire. I need to try again. Claire pulled her chair closer. All right. Margaret reset the recording. The red timer returned to 0. Beside them, the metronome marked the silence. Tick, tick. Margaret drew one careful breath, then pressed record again. The second recording lasted 11 seconds. Jonathan, it's Mom. I know it's been a long time and Margaret stopped. Her thumb pressed the screen, delete. Claire said nothing. Margaret stared at the phone. That sounded terrible. It sounded scared. Worse. Want to try again? Margaret gave her a tired look. You're annoyingly patient. I'm off the clock. I have fewer responsibilities. That earned the smallest smile. The metronome sat between them, its pendulum moving steadily. Tick, tick, tick. Margaret pressed record again. Jonathan? This time she made it 17 seconds. Delete. The third attempt reached 29. Delete. By 9:43 p.m., Margaret looked more exhausted by the voicemail than by the conversation about death. Claire reached for the metronome. Too fast. Everything feels too fast. Claire adjusted the weight on the pendulum. The rhythm slowed. Tick. A pause. Tick. Margaret closed her eyes. For years, that sound had guided frightened children through difficult measures. Now the teacher needed it herself. Don't make a speech, Claire said. Margaret opened one eye. I taught for 34 years. Speeches are a medical condition. Then pretend he's sitting right there. Claire pointed to the empty chair near the window. What would you say? First, Margaret stared at it. I'd say I'm sorry. Then start there. Margaret lifted the phone. Record? Jonathan, I'm sorry. She paused. The red timer continued. I've practiced better versions of this conversation for 6 years. None of them helped me make the call. Claire lowered her eyes, giving Margaret privacy without leaving. I blamed you for leaving when the truth is, I helped push you out the door. Margaret took another breath. Your father made his own choices. I knew that. I just didn't know what to do with losing him, so I made you carry part of my grief. Her voice broke. Claire watched Margaret's thumb hover near the stop button. Keep going, she whispered. Margaret did. I was angry because you reminded me of him. Then I was angry because you stopped coming around. That wasn't fair. She swallowed. I missed you. No explanation, no defense, just 3 words. Margaret closed her eyes. I missed you every day. The timer passed 1 minute. Margaret looked toward Claire. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. There's a nurse sitting with me tonight. Claire immediately shook her head. Margaret, she has very tired shoes. Absolutely not. Margaret ignored her. She's pretending they aren't falling apart. Claire covered her face. Even now, Margaret found enough breath to be troublesome. She has a little boy waiting for her, and she should probably be home. Margaret's smile faded, but she stayed. Claire lowered her hands. She didn't have to. Nobody ordered her to. She isn't even being paid anymore. Margaret looked directly at Claire. And somehow, Jonathan, that makes me feel less afraid. Claire's throat tightened. Margaret turned back to the phone. I thought you should know that. She stopped the recording. For several seconds, neither spoke. Claire finally said, you completely ignored the 60-second rule. I was a teacher. Rules were for students. Margaret saved the message. Then she sent it. The small sound from the phone was almost nothing. Yet Margaret stared at the screen as though she had just pushed open a door sealed for 6 years. There, Claire said. There. Margaret placed the phone beside her. Nothing happened. No immediate call. No miracle. Only the metronome. Tick, tick. At 10:02, Claire's phone vibrated. She expected Renee. Instead, it was an automated message from hospital parking services. Employee permit expired. Vehicle subject to citation, tow warning. Claire stared at it. You've got that face again, Margaret said. What face? The one where money has entered the room. Claire locked the screen. It's nothing. Your nothing's very expressive. Before Claire could answer, another message arrived. Renee, Noah's asleep. Don't rush. But I need $35 for tonight when you can. Claire typed, I know. Thank you. She opened her banking app. $43.18. $8.18 would remain. Gas alone would take more than that. She put the phone away. Margaret had watched everything. You're spending money to sit with me. No, yes. I'm spending money because my sister understands capitalism. Margaret did not smile. You should go. Stop trying to fire me. I already clocked out. The door opened. Patricia Collins stood there. Apparently she had heard the last sentence. That Patricia said is exactly what I wanted to discuss. Claire sighed. Of course it is. Patricia stepped inside, but kept her voice low. Administration doesn't want off-duty employees remaining in clinical areas without authorization. I'm not providing care. You're still in uniform. I can take off the scrub top, but I think that creates a different policy issue. Margaret laughed, then coughed. Patricia tried not to react. Claire, I'm serious. So am I. Your handoff is complete. Yes. You're not charting, no. Administering medication, no. Making clinical decisions, no. Patricia folded her arms. Then technically you're here as a visitor. Patricia closed her eyes briefly. You planned that answer. I've had time. Patricia looked toward Margaret. Something in her expression softened. Then the supervisor returned. If the assigned nurse needs the room, you move. If Margaret asks you to leave, you leave. If anything changes medically, you call staff. Understood. And do not make this a habit. Claire nodded. Patricia started toward the door. Margaret spoke. Ms. Collins. Patricia turned. You run this floor tonight, I do. You need more nurses. Patricia looked at Claire. Claire raised both hands. I said nothing. Margaret pointed weakly at her. She didn't have to. Patricia's face tightened with an exhaustion Margaret seemed to recognize immediately. I know, Patricia said. Then she left. The room became quiet again. Margaret looked at Claire's shoes. Then at the phone Claire had tucked away. You have a boy waiting a car threatening rebellion and apparently a parking department hunting you. Accurate. And you're still here. Claire shrugged. Margaret did not. You shouldn't have to lose something to prove you care. The words landed differently. Claire looked at her. Margaret continued softly. Goodness shouldn't require punishment. Claire had no answer. In hospitals, sacrifice was often praised because fixing the conditions that required sacrifice was harder. People called nurses angels when sometimes what they needed was enough staff. They called exhaustion dedication. They called unpaid compassion a calling. Claire looked toward the metronome. Tick, tick, tick. At 10:19, Margaret's phone remained silent. No call from Jonathan. Claire could see disappointment beginning to settle behind her eyes. Maybe he hasn't heard it yet. Maybe. You sent it. I did. That part was yours. Margaret nodded slowly. And the rest, Claire looked toward the dark window. The rest belongs to him. Margaret reached for Claire's hand. Her fingers felt colder now. Claire held them gently. Neither woman knew that hundreds of miles away, Jonathan Whitmore's phone was sitting face down on a conference table while he finished the meeting he had convinced himself could not wait. But the voicemail was there, waiting. And when Jonathan finally heard his mother say the words, "I missed you every day," time would become the one thing his money could no longer control. At 10:34 p.m., Margaret Whitmore stopped asking what time it was. Claire noticed because Margaret had asked 4 times during the previous hour. Now she simply watched the window. Baltimore stretched beneath them in scattered lights, blurred by condensation on the glass. Somewhere far below, an ambulance entered the emergency drive, its red reflections moving briefly across the buildings before disappearing. Inside room 614, the world had become smaller. A bed, a chair, 2 women, and an old wooden metronome. Tick, tick, tick. Margaret shifted beneath the blanket. Claire immediately noticed. Uncomfortable. A little? Claire reached toward the call button. Margaret caught her wrist weakly. Don't fuss. I'm not fussing. You're professionally fussing. I'm not professional right now. Remember? Then you're naturally irritating. Claire smiled and pressed the call button anyway. The assigned night nurse entered a minute later, assessed Margaret, and administered the medication already ordered for comfort. Claire stayed beside the window. She had made a promise to Patricia. No charting, no medication, no pretending she was still on duty. But there were things that did not require a license. When Margaret's lips became dry, Claire dampened a sponge and handed it to the nurse. When the blanket slipped, Claire pulled it gently back over Margaret's shoulders after the nurse left. When Margaret squinted toward the window, Claire stood. What curtain? You want it closed, open. It is open. More. Claire pulled it completely aside. There. Margaret looked out. Baltimore always looks kinder from 6 floors up, because you can't see the potholes. Margaret smiled. Exactly. Claire sat again. For several minutes, they watched the city without speaking. At 10:51, a housekeeping cart stopped outside. Angela Morris appeared in the doorway. She had changed out of her gloves and looked ready to go home. I was leaving, she said. Margaret turned her head. That's generally what people do when work ends. Angela looked at Claire. Apparently not everybody. Claire raised a hand. I'm receiving enough criticism tonight. Angela stepped closer to Margaret. How you feeling? Like death? Angela froze. Margaret waited 2 seconds, then smiled. Too soon, Angela stared at her. With an air. Angela shook her head, but tears had already appeared in her eyes. Margaret noticed. Oh, don't do that. I'm not doing anything. You're leaking. Dust. In a hospital budget cuts. Claire looked away to give Angela time to recover. Then Margaret lifted one hand toward the bedside table. The sugar, Angela frowned. You still thinking about that coffee tomorrow? I'm off tomorrow. Then Wednesday. Margaret pushed 3 sugar packets toward her. Angela did not take them. Keep them. For what I don't know. I'm dying, Angela, not opening a bakery. Angela pressed her lips together. Then she took the packets. Fine. Good. Angela held them tightly in her palm. You remember when you complained my mop was squeaking? It was in B-flat. It was a mop. It was still flat. Angela laughed through her tears. Then she leaned down and kissed Margaret's forehead. I'll see you. Margaret looked at her for a long moment. No promises? Angela nodded. No promises. She walked out, pushing the cart slowly. Claire watched her disappear down the corridor. She likes you. She has questionable judgment. You saved sugar for her. 3 packets. Hardly sainthood. It mattered. Margaret looked at Claire. That's the problem with people. What is we wait for something enormous before we decide something matters? Claire thought about the peanut butter crackers Noah had slipped into her bag, a 24-year-old EMT holding Daniel's hand, 3 sugar packets, a chair beside a hospital bed. Small things. Except to the person receiving them. Margaret shifted again. Music. Claire leaned closer. What I want music. What kind not that spa nonsense hospitals play. Claire took out her phone. Specific request, Margaret named a recording of Debussy's Clair de Lune. Claire found it. The first piano notes entered the room softly. Margaret closed her eyes. Claire placed the phone near the pillow. The piano and metronome did not perfectly match. One wandered, the other insisted. For some reason, together, they made the room feel warmer. Margaret's fingers moved faintly against the blanket. Claire realized she was playing invisible keys. You still play not well. I doubt that. My hands disagree. Margaret opened her eyes. I used to tell my students something. Claire glanced at the metronome. As long as you can hear it, you're not alone. That too. What else? Never stop because of one wrong note. Claire smiled. Useful beyond piano. Most useful things are. The music continued. At 11:16, Margaret spoke again. I lied earlier. Claire looked over. About what? My biggest regret. Claire waited. I said things to Jonathan I wish I could take back. Her breathing was slower now. But that isn't what hurts most. What does the waiting? Claire said nothing. After our fight, I thought he should call. Margaret stared toward the ceiling. When he did, I didn't answer because I wanted him to call twice. Claire felt a quiet ache in her chest. He did, I know. And then I wanted 3. Margaret gave a bitter little smile. Pride is very good at moving the finish line. Claire looked down. Eventually he stopped. Yes. Then you'd waited for him. And he probably waited for me. 6 years. Not 6 years of hatred. 6 years of 2 people standing on opposite sides of a door, each believing the other should open it. Margaret looked at Claire. The argument lasted maybe 10 minutes. Her voice weakened. We let 10 minutes steal 6 years. Claire glanced towards the metronome. Tick, tick, tick. That's why I kept it, Margaret whispered. The metronome. It reminds you that time keeps moving even when you don't. Claire reached for Margaret's hand. This time Margaret accepted it immediately. "I sent the message," she said. "You did. What if he doesn't forgive me?" "You didn't send an invoice." Margaret looked confused. "You apologized because you needed to tell the truth. Forgiveness belongs to him. That's irritatingly sensible. I have moments." Margaret closed her eyes. The piano continued quietly. Then a sudden vibration sounded against the bedside table. Both women looked toward the phone. The screen illuminated the dim room. Claire saw the name first. Jonathan. Margaret opened her eyes. For a second, the weakness disappeared from them. There was only a mother looking at the name of the son she had not spoken to in almost 6 years. The phone continued vibrating. Claire looked at Margaret. Margaret looked at Claire. "Do you want me to answer?" Margaret's hand moved toward the phone, then stopped halfway. The call continued. 1 second, 2, 3. Claire waited. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. And just before the call could go to voicemail, Margaret slowly shook her head. Claire did not touch the phone. Jonathan's name continued glowing on the screen. Margaret's hand remained halfway between the blanket and the bedside table, trembling from the effort. "Are you sure?" Claire asked. Margaret nodded. The phone vibrated once more, then stopped. Room 614 became quiet again. Only the piano recording remained soft beneath the metronome. Tick, tick, tick. Claire watched Margaret's face. "That may have been your chance. I know. You want me to call him back?" "No." "Okay." Margaret closed her eyes. "He needs to hear the message first." Claire understood then. Margaret was not rejecting her son. She was afraid that if she heard Jonathan's voice, 6 years of regret would become too large for her failing body to carry. "What if he calls again?" Margaret's breathing caught. "Then maybe I'll be braver." Claire squeezed her hand. Fair enough. 700 miles away, Jonathan Whitmore stood beneath fluorescent lights at Gate C-17 in Chicago O'Hare International Airport. His phone was pressed to his ear. No answer. He ended the call and stared at Margaret's name. Mom. He had never changed it. Not after the argument, not after the first year of silence, not after the third. Not even after he convinced himself there was nothing left between them except biology and unfinished anger. Mr. Whitmore Jonathan looked up. His chief operating officer, Rachel Monroe, stood several feet away holding a laptop bag. Their investor meeting had run almost 2 hours late. Jonathan had spent most of it discussing hospital efficiency, staff utilization, predictive scheduling, labor optimization, words he knew how to control. His mother's voice was something else. "You all right?" Rachel asked. Jonathan did not answer. 20 minutes earlier, while leaving the conference room, he had finally noticed the voicemail notification. He had almost ignored it. Margaret rarely called, almost never anymore. Then he saw the recording length. 2 minutes, 14 seconds. Something made him press play. "Jonathan, I'm sorry." He had stopped walking. People moved around him toward elevators, restaurants, and taxis. His mother's voice sounded thinner than he remembered. "I've practiced better versions of this conversation for 6 years." Jonathan had listened through the apology, through the mention of his father, through the words he had wanted for so long that hearing them no longer felt like victory. "I missed you every day." That was where Jonathan stopped the recording. Not because he did not want to hear more, because suddenly he could not breathe. He had called immediately. Now the call had gone unanswered. Rachel stepped closer. "Jonathan, my mother's in the hospital." "Which hospital?" "St. Catherine." "Baltimore." Rachel checked the departure board. "Our flight's in 90 minutes. Jonathan was already searching. Too late. "There's another commercial flight, leaving in 35. Gate Rachel searched, B9, other terminal." Jonathan picked up his bag. "Book it. I can arrange the company jet." "How long?" She hesitated. "Crew availability, flight plan repositioning. Maybe 90 minutes. Jonathan was already walking. Then it's slower. Rachel followed. "Your luggage, leave it." They moved through the terminal. Jonathan called his mother again. No answer. He tried St. Catherine. A receptionist transferred him twice. Then the call disconnected. He swore under his breath. "Jonathan, Rachel said I can have someone contact hospital administration." "No." She looked surprised. "I don't need administration. I need my mother." He reached security for the connecting terminal and stopped. The voicemail. He had not finished it. Jonathan put in one earbud and pressed play from where he had stopped. Margaret's voice returned. "There's a nurse sitting with me tonight." Jonathan closed his eyes. She has very tired shoes. Despite everything, he almost smiled. That sounded like his mother. She has a little boy waiting for her, and she should probably be home. Jonathan's smile disappeared, but she stayed. Airport announcements echoed overhead. Passengers rolled suitcases around him. Jonathan heard none of it. She didn't have to. Nobody ordered her to. She isn't even being paid anymore. A pause followed. Jonathan could hear another sound behind Margaret's voice. Tick, 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 the metronome. He recognized it instantly. The same wooden metronome that had sat on their family piano when he was a child. The same sound he had practiced scales against while Margaret stood beside him correcting his posture. And somehow, "Jonathan, that makes me feel less afraid." Jonathan stopped walking. Rachel nearly collided with him. His mother was afraid. The realization struck harder than the diagnosis. He had spent years imagining Margaret as immovable, proud, difficult, sharp enough to survive anything. He had never imagined her frightened in a hospital room with only a stranger beside her. Jonathan replayed the final sentence. Then he called again. No answer. Back in Baltimore, Claire watched Margaret struggle for each breath. The night nurse had returned to reassess her. Comfort medication helped, but Claire could see the change. Margaret was withdrawing inward. Her eyes stayed closed longer. Her answers became shorter. At 11:43, Claire noticed the metronome. The rhythm was no longer as steady. Tick, tick. A slightly longer pause. Tick. Claire leaned toward it. Margaret opened her eyes. "It's slowing. I can wind it." "No." "Margaret." "Not yet." Claire withdrew her hand. Margaret looked toward the phone. He heard it. "You don't know that?" He called. Claire nodded. "Yes." A faint peace crossed Margaret's face. "That's enough for now." Claire wanted to argue, to tell her it wasn't enough, that Jonathan might be trying again, that reconciliation was close enough to touch, but nurses learned early that hope could become cruelty when forced upon someone. So Claire simply sat. At O'Hare, Jonathan reached Gate B9 as boarding began. Rachel handed him a new boarding pass. "I'll take the morning flight." Jonathan nodded. Then Rachel caught his arm. "Go." He looked at her. She had worked with him for 9 years. She knew the man who never left meetings early, never missed quarterly calls, and treated calendars like contracts. "Whatever is waiting tomorrow," Rachel said, "it can wait." Jonathan looked toward the jet bridge. For 6 years, he and his mother had both believed there would always be another day, another birthday, another Christmas, another chance to call. Now every minute felt stolen. He boarded. At 11:58 p.m., the plane pushed away from the gate. Jonathan stared at his phone until the signal disappeared. In room 614, Claire reached for the metronome again. The pendulum had slowed further. Tick, pause, tick. "It needs winding," Claire whispered. Margaret's eyes opened. This time she lifted her hand and gently covered Claire's fingers before they reached the wooden case. "No." Claire looked at her. "Let it go." Outside, somewhere above the dark Midwest, Jonathan Whitmore was racing toward Baltimore. But beside Margaret's bed, time had already begun to run out. At 12:40 a.m., Claire Bennett realized she had stopped thinking about money. Not because the problems had disappeared. Her sister still needed $35. Her checking account still held $43.18. The parking warning was still on her phone. The Honda's alternator was still one bad start away from becoming 4,000 pounds of useless metal, and Noah was sleeping somewhere that was not home because his mother had chosen to remain in room 614. All of those things still existed. They simply felt very far away. Margaret Whitmore was dying. The change had happened gradually enough that Claire could not identify the exact moment. Margaret had stopped making jokes. Then she stopped asking questions. Then her eyes remained closed longer between breaths. Now each inhale seemed to arrive only after her body had considered whether another one was worth the effort. The assigned night nurse had checked her minutes earlier. Dr. Carter had been notified. There was nothing left to reverse, only comfort, only presence. Claire sat beside the bed with her coat folded over her lap. The metronome had slowed. Tick, pause, tick. Its spring was nearly exhausted. Claire watched the pendulum struggle across the center. She reached toward it. Margaret's fingers moved. Barely. But enough. No. Claire stopped. It's almost wound down. Margaret opened her eyes. Let it. Her voice was hardly audible. Claire withdrew her hand. For 42 years, that wooden box had taught frightened children to keep going after wrong notes. Tonight, Margaret wanted it to stop when it was ready. Claire understood. Her phone vibrated. She looked down. Renee had sent a photograph. Noah was asleep on the couch beneath a Spider-Man blanket, one hand hanging toward the floor. Beside his head sat the backpack he insisted was too old for him, but refused to replace. Under the picture, Renee had written, "He waited as long as he could. Told me not to let you forget breakfast tomorrow." Claire smiled, then covered her mouth. For one dangerous second, emotion rose so quickly she thought she might lose control. Margaret noticed. Your boy Claire turned the phone toward her. Margaret studied the picture. Good kid? The best? Go home? Claire shook her head. He's safe. You keep saying that. Because he is? Margaret's eyes drifted closed again. Doesn't mean he doesn't need you. Claire absorbed that. No. She looked at Noah's sleeping face. It doesn't. Margaret opened her eyes. And you need him. Claire nodded. Yeah. Then why are you here? It was not criticism. Margaret genuinely wanted to know. Claire put the phone face down. Because tonight he has somebody. Margaret stared at her. And you don't. For several seconds, Margaret said nothing. Then her fingers shifted across the blanket. Claire placed her hand beneath them. Margaret held on, weakly, but deliberately. At 12:53, the night nurse entered. She checked Margaret's breathing pulse and comfort level. Claire stood to give her space. The nurse looked at her afterward. It may not be long. Claire nodded. Family coming, her son, maybe. Does he know I think so? The nurse looked toward Margaret. I'll stay close, thank you. After she left, Claire returned to the chair. Margaret was looking toward the window. The city had become blurred lights. Claire. I'm here. I know. The metronome moved. Tick. Long pause. Tick. Margaret swallowed. I spent years teaching children not to rush the rests. Claire leaned closer. The rests. In music. Margaret's breathing interrupted her words. Children think silence means nothing is happening. She closed her eyes. But the silence belongs to the song, too. Claire felt tears gather, but did not wipe them away. Margaret's gaze moved toward the metronome. I think I understand it now. Claire squeezed her hand. You don't have to talk. I know. Another breath, then another. Margaret looked at Claire with surprising clarity. Promise me something. Claire hesitated. Nurses knew better than to promise what they could not control. What Margaret took time to gather enough air. Don't let people become numbers. Claire frowned slightly. I won't. Not just patience. Margaret's fingers tightened. people. Claire thought of pulse grid, staffing assignments, labor hours, room numbers, patient counts. The messages telling nurses exactly when their compassion became unauthorized overtime. But she did not yet understand why Margaret had chosen those particular words. I'll remember. Margaret studied her as if deciding whether that was enough. Apparently it was. Her face softened. Good. At 1:01 a.m., the metronome hesitated. Tick. Silence. Tick. Claire looked toward it. Margaret did not. Her eyes were closed. Her breathing had become irregular. Claire moved closer until her knees touched the side of the bed. I'm here. Margaret's lips moved. Claire leaned down. What is long? The words dissolved into breath. Claire knew the rest. As long as you can hear it, you're not alone. Margaret's eyelids fluttered. Claire did not know whether she heard, so she said it again. You're not alone. The night nurse appeared quietly at the doorway. Claire looked at her. The nurse came closer, checked Margaret, then remained on the opposite side of the bed. Nobody rushed, nobody shouted, nobody pretended death was a medical error that could still be corrected. At 1:05, Margaret took a shallow breath. Then nothing. Claire waited. Another came. The metronome swung. Tick. Margaret exhaled. The pendulum crossed back. Tick. Another breath did not come. Claire kept holding her hand. The nurse watched the clock. The metronome moved once more. Tick. Then stopped. The pendulum rested slightly left of center. Claire stared at it. For 6 hours, the room had been filled with that sound. Its absence felt enormous. The nurse gently checked Margaret. After a moment, she looked at Claire and gave a small nod. Claire lowered her eyes. Margaret Whitmore was gone. No son had reached the doorway. No last-minute reunion had occurred. There had been no miracle. Only a dying woman, a tired nurse, a wooden metronome, and a hand that had not let go. Claire remained there another minute, maybe 2. Nobody asked her to move. Finally, she placed Margaret's hand carefully on the blanket. She touched the wooden metronome but did not wind it. Instead, she moved it beside Margaret's hand. "Good night," Claire whispered. Outside, St. Catherine rain had begun falling over Baltimore. Claire put on her coat and walked toward the elevators. Her shoes hurt. Her phone battery was nearly dead. Her car might not start. She felt emptied out. But before the elevator doors closed, Claire looked once more toward room 614. She had no way of knowing that somewhere above the clouds, Jonathan Whitmore was staring at the dark screen of his phone, waiting desperately for the plane to land. He was coming. He was simply 1 hour too late. Jonathan Whitmore reached St. Catherine Medical Center at 2:18 a.m. He had spent the final 20 minutes of the flight staring at the airplane's route map, as if concentration could move Baltimore closer. The moment the wheels touched down, he called his mother. No answer. He called again while walking through the terminal. Then St. Catherine. The woman who answered transferred him to the 6th floor. "Margaret Whitmore," Jonathan said. "Room 614. I'm her son." A pause followed. "Too long. Sir, are you able to come to the hospital?" Jonathan stopped walking. "I'm already coming." The pause told him before the words did. By 2:17, a rideshare was pulling beneath St. Catherine's entrance. Jonathan was out before the car fully stopped. At 45, he was accustomed to entering buildings where people knew his name. Tonight, nobody did. That was almost a relief. "I'm here for Margaret Whitmore." The receptionist looked at her screen. "Room 614. Yes, 6th floor." Jonathan turned toward the elevators. "Sir." He stopped. Her expression had changed. "You may want to speak with the nurse first. I want to see my mother." She did not argue. The elevator seemed impossibly slow. Jonathan pressed 6, then pressed it again. He could hear Margaret teasing him when he was 12. Pushing it twice doesn't make it arrive faster. He had not thought about that in years. The doors opened. Dr. Samuel Carter was waiting near the nurse's station. "Mr. Whitmore?" "Yes, I'm Dr. Carter." Jonathan searched the physician's face. "Is she alive?" Dr. Carter did not hide behind medical language. "No. One word." Jonathan looked past him toward room 614. When 106. Jonathan checked his watch automatically. 72 minutes. He had missed his mother by 72 minutes. Was she in pain? "We kept her comfortable." Jonathan nodded, but the question that mattered more came harder. Was she alone? Dr. Carter's expression softened. "No." Jonathan looked up. "One of our nurses stayed with her. During her shift ended around 7. Jonathan stared at him. "What time did she leave after your mother died?" The airport voicemail returned to him. "There's a nurse sitting with me tonight. She isn't even being paid anymore. Her name, Claire Bennett." Jonathan repeated it silently. "Claire Bennett." He walked toward room 614. The room had already changed. That disturbed him. The oxygen tubing was gone. The medication cups had been cleared. The blanket had been straightened. The bed was empty. Hospitals were efficient at making space for the next tragedy. Jonathan stepped inside. For several seconds he could not move farther. Then he saw the visitor chair. He imagined a stranger sitting there while his mother died. He sat down. The chair was uncomfortable. Vinyl. Metal arms. Nothing special. Yet someone with a child waiting at home had remained in it for 6 hours. Jonathan looked toward the bedside table. The metronome was there. He reached for it. His fingers touched the scratched wooden casing. Suddenly he was 9 years old. His feet did not reach the piano pedals. Margaret stood behind him. Again. He played the measure. Again. He missed the note. Stopped. Margaret tapped the metronome. Jonathan, the mistake isn't the end of the song. He could almost smell their old living room, furniture polish, coffee, his father's aftershave. Jonathan closed his eyes. When he opened them, Angela Morris was standing in the doorway. "I'm sorry," she said. Jonathan straightened. "You knew her." Angela looked almost offended. "I cleaned this room." That was not an answer. Then Jonathan noticed 3 sugar packets in her hand. Angela looked at them too. "She saved these for me." Jonathan stared. "My mother every day." A laugh escaped him unexpectedly. She used to steal sweetener from restaurants. She said hospital coffee needed medical intervention. Jonathan covered his mouth. For the first time that night, his face broke. "That sounds like her." Angela stepped inside. "You're Jonathan." "Yes. She talked about you." Jonathan looked up sharply. "Tonight not much to me." Angela nodded toward the chair. "Mostly to Claire." "The nurse." Angela nodded. She stayed. Why Angela considered him? "Maybe because your mother needed somebody." Jonathan looked down. The simplicity hurt. Angela continued. "Claire had somewhere else to be. Heard her talking about her boy. Heard something about babysitting money." Jonathan remembered the voicemail, the tired shoes, the little boy. She stayed anyway. "Yeah?" Jonathan touched the metronome again. Angela quietly left. He sat alone for several minutes before remembering he had not finished his mother's message. At the airport, he had stopped after the part about Claire. There had been more. Jonathan took out his phone. He pressed play. Margaret's voice filled room 614. And somehow, Jonathan, that makes me feel less afraid. Jonathan lowered his head. The recording continued. "I don't know what your company does anymore. Every article uses words I don't understand." A faint breath. "But I know you build things for hospitals." Jonathan became still. "And this nurse keeps looking at this clock, because somebody somewhere decided every minute has to justify itself." Jonathan looked toward the hallway. At the nurse's station, a tablet was mounted beside a monitor. The screen refreshed. He recognized the interface instantly. PulseGrid, his company's flagship workforce platform. Margaret continued. She clocked out to sit with me. Jonathan stopped breathing for a second. If your company can count every minute, son. His mother paused. Teach it to count the minutes that matter. The message ended. Jonathan remained motionless. PulseGrid had begun as a scheduling tool. Reduce unnecessary overtime, predict staffing, improve efficiency. Hospitals demanded savings, and Whitmore Health Technologies delivered them. Jonathan had seen dashboards showing millions of dollars saved. He had celebrated reduced labor variance. He had stood on stages talking about optimization. He had never sat in room 614. He had never watched a nurse decide whether a frightened, dying woman deserved 20 minutes that a dashboard considered unnecessary. Jonathan stood. He walked to the hallway and stared at the PulseGrid screen. 7 nurses active. Patient load, projected discharge, labor utilization, green, yellow, red, everything had a number. Everything except the empty chair beside his mother's bed. Dr. Carter approached. Mr. Whitmore Jonathan pointed toward the screen. How long has St. Catherine used PulseGrid? About 6 weeks. Jonathan nodded. He already knew what the corporate report would say. Improved efficiency, reduced overtime, better utilization. His mother had given him another metric. A nurse with $43 in her bank account had clocked out because the system could not justify paying her to sit beside a dying woman. Where is Claire Bennett now? Home, I assume. Jonathan looked back at room 614. No. Dr. Carter frowned. No, let her sleep. Jonathan picked up Margaret's metronome. I'll come back. When Jonathan looked at the silent wooden pendulum. After I understand what my mother was trying to tell me. 2 days later, a black sedan would stop beneath the hospital awning, and Jonathan Whitmore would return carrying the metronome, asking for the one person his company's dashboard had never learned how to measure. 2 days after Margaret Whitmore died, Claire Bennett's Honda finally gave up. It happened at 6:18 in the morning. Claire turned the key. Click. She tried again. Click, click, come on. Nothing. Noah stood beside the passenger door wearing his backpack and holding half a piece of toast. Is she being dramatic again? Claire tried a third time. Silence. No, she said. I think she has committed to the role. Noah walked around to the front and placed one hand on the hood. Maybe she needs encouragement. She needs an alternator. How much? Claire looked at him. Why I have $23. Something inside her tightened. Noah, and 40 cents. You are not fixing my car. I don't use it. You ride in it. Not today. Despite herself, Claire laughed. Then she looked at the time. 6:23. Her shift began at 7. The next bus was 12 minutes away. Come on. Claire grabbed her bag. They hurried toward the corner. By the time she dropped Noah with Renee and caught the second bus toward St. Catherine, Claire knew something unprecedented was about to happen. She was going to be late. At 7:04, she hurried through the employee entrance. 4 minutes. It should not have mattered, but for years Claire had arrived 11 minutes early. Daniel's voice followed her through the lobby. If you arrive early, somebody gets to breathe easier. Sorry, Claire said, as she reached the 6th-floor nurses' station. Patricia Collins looked at the clock, then at Claire. Are you okay? My car died. Completely. Moment of silence scheduled for noon. Patricia almost smiled. Then her expression became serious. Administration wants to see you. Claire stopped. Why, you know why. Room 614, 6 unpaid hours. Staying in a clinical area after clocking out. Claire had known there might be consequences. Knowing did not make her rent cheaper. Am I being written up? I don't know. Patricia, I honestly don't. Claire looked toward the elevators. Now they said when you arrived. Claire put her bag beneath the desk. Great. Claire. She turned. Patricia lowered her voice. For what it's worth, I told them your handoff was complete. And you stayed as a visitor. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Claire nodded and walked toward administration. Downstairs, a black sedan pulled beneath the hospital awning. Jonathan Whitmore stepped out carrying a wooden metronome. He had spent the previous 48 hours doing something his executive team rarely saw him do. Listening. He had reviewed pulse grid reports from St. Catherine. He had spoken with engineers, hospital administrators, 2 nursing supervisors from other facilities. Then he had requested anonymized comments from frontline staff. One appeared repeatedly in different forms. No time to sit with patients. Jonathan had read it 12 times. Now he entered the hospital where his mother had spent her final hours. A senior administrator recognized him almost immediately. Mr. Whitmore. Jonathan stopped. Jonathan Hale, Chief Operating Officer. We weren't expecting. I'm not here for a meeting. Of course. We were very sorry to hear about your mother. Thank you. If there's anything St. Catherine can... There is. Hale straightened. I need Claire Bennett. The administrator hesitated. The nurse. Yes. We can arrange a conference room. Is she here? I believe so. Then please tell her I'd like to speak with her. Hale glanced at the metronome. May I ask what this concerns my mother? That ended the questions. Upstairs, Claire was halfway toward administration when Patricia called after her. Claire. She turned. Change of destination. What now? Conference room 3. Why? Patricia looked puzzled. Someone asked for you. Who? Jonathan Whitmore. The name struck Claire differently now. Margaret's son. Her stomach tightened. Why, I don't know. Claire thought of Margaret's final hours. Had she done something wrong? Had Jonathan decided Claire overstepped by encouraging the voicemail? Families in grief sometimes needed somewhere to put anger. Claire understood that. She just could not afford to lose her job because of it. She walked downstairs. Conference room 3 was small and overly cold. Jonathan stood near the window. Claire recognized him from the photograph on Margaret's phone. He turned. Claire Bennett. Yes. I'm Jonathan Whitmore. I know. His expression shifted. My mother told you only your name. Claire closed the door behind her. I'm sorry you didn't get there in time. Jonathan looked down. So am I. Neither spoke for a moment. Claire finally said, If you have questions about her medical care, the assigned nurse or Dr. Carter would be better. I'm not here about her medication. Jonathan picked something up from the table. The metronome. Claire stopped. Seeing it brought room 614 back instantly. Margaret's hand, the slowing breaths. Tick. Silence. Tick. Jonathan placed it between them. She left me a voicemail. Claire nodded. She told me. She talked about you. Claire looked uncomfortable. Margaret was medicated. She was also very specific about your shoes. Claire glanced down. The soul had separated again. Jonathan almost smiled. Claire did not. If you came to thank me, you don't owe me anything. I know, I mean that. So do I. Jonathan pulled out a chair. Would you sit? Claire remained standing. I'm supposed to be working. Jonathan absorbed the irony. 5 minutes. Claire finally sat. Jonathan sat opposite her. My company built Pulse Grid. Claire's eyes narrowed slightly. Now she recognized the surname. Whitmore Health Technologies. She looked toward the metronome. Margaret knew, yes. She never told me. She told me something instead. Jonathan took out his phone, but did not play the voicemail. She said if my company could count every minute, I should teach it to count the minutes that matter. Claire said nothing. I've spent 2 days trying to understand what that means. And I understand the software. That wasn't my question. Jonathan looked at her. For perhaps the first time in years, someone sitting across from him seemed completely unimpressed by his title. I don't understand the room, he admitted. Room 614. Yes? Claire leaned back. Jonathan continued. Pulse Grid says St. Catherine was adequately staffed that night. Claire gave a quiet, humorless laugh. What nothing? No, tell me. You came here because you want me to explain why a green dashboard didn't make your mother less afraid. Jonathan did not defend himself. Yes. Claire studied him. He looked exhausted. Not corporate exhausted, grief exhausted. That mattered. What do you want from me, Mr. Whitmore? The truth. Claire looked at the metronome, then at him. You may not like it. I don't think my mother intended me to. That answer changed something, only slightly. But enough. Jonathan leaned forward. What did my mother need that night that our system didn't give her? Claire looked toward the conference room clock. Every instinct told her to return upstairs. Tasks were waiting, patients were waiting, numbers were accumulating. Then she remembered Margaret's final words. Don't let people become numbers. Claire turned back to Jonathan. Your system knew her diagnosis, she said. It knew her medications, her acuity, her expected length of stay. It knew exactly how many nursing hours the hospital thought she should require. Jonathan listened. But your mother wasn't afraid of her diagnosis. Claire placed one hand beside the silent metronome. She was afraid everybody would leave. Jonathan lowered his eyes. And your system had no box for that. The room went still. For the first time since arriving, Jonathan did not look like a CEO searching for an answer. He looked like a son, realizing the answer had been sitting beside his mother for 6 hours. Jonathan Whitmore remained silent long enough for Claire Bennett to wonder whether she had gone too far. Then he asked, How often does that happen? Claire knew exactly what he meant. How often does what happen? A patient needs someone to stay, but the system says there isn't time. Claire leaned back. Do you want the answer that sounds good in a conference room? No. Then, often. Jonathan's jaw tightened. How often you're still trying to turn it into a number? That stopped him. Claire looked at the metronome between them. You want me to explain what your dashboard couldn't see? Yes. Okay. She folded her hands. It couldn't see Margaret getting scared every time someone walked toward the door. Jonathan lowered his eyes. It couldn't see room 611's daughter asking the same question 4 times because she wasn't stupid. She was terrified her father was dying. Claire continued. It couldn't see a nurse deciding whether to spend 5 extra minutes explaining a diagnosis or get written up because 3 medications are late. Jonathan did not interrupt. PulseGrid knows how long I'm in a room. It doesn't know why. Jonathan nodded slowly. That distinction should matter. It matters to patients. The sentence landed harder than Claire intended. Jonathan accepted it. Would you be willing to tell my team this? No. The answer came so quickly, he blinked. No, I'm not interested in becoming the inspirational nurse in your corporate video. That isn't what I meant. I've seen how this works. Claire's voice remained calm. Company discovers uncomfortable story. Company puts struggling employee on a stage. Everybody applauds compassion. Then nothing changes Monday morning? Jonathan looked at her carefully. You think that's what I came here to do? I don't know why you came. To understand what happened to my mother. That I believe. And to make sure it doesn't happen the same way to somebody else. Claire studied him. That's harder. I know. No, you don't. Jonathan did not react defensively. That surprised her. Instead, he asked, Then tell me. Claire glanced at the clock. 5 minutes had become 17. She thought of her patients upstairs. Then she thought of Margaret. Your mother told me something that night. What she said, I shouldn't have to lose something to prove I care. Jonathan looked toward Claire's damaged shoe. She noticed. This isn't about my shoes. I know. I paid $35 for someone to keep my son. I risked a parking citation. I stayed 6 hours without pay. Jonathan reached for his jacket pocket. Claire's expression hardened immediately. Don't. His hand stopped. I was going to offer to reimburse you. No. Claire, those are expenses you incurred because of my mother. No, why? Because then you get to solve this with a check. Jonathan slowly withdrew his hand. Claire continued. I made that choice. I don't regret it. But the next nurse shouldn't have to choose between being a decent human being and paying for groceries. Jonathan sat very still. Goodness shouldn't require punishment, he said. Claire looked at him. Margaret told you that too. No, she told me. Jonathan absorbed the words. Claire leaned forward. You want something worth fixing? Fix that. How? If I knew the whole answer, I wouldn't be working 7 patients while software tells the hospital we are adequately staffed. For the first time, Jonathan almost smiled. Fair. But I know where I'd start. His expression changed. We're end-of-life patients. Claire described what nurses already knew. Some dying patients had families who filled hallways. Others had nobody. A spouse was dead. Children lived across the country. Families were estranged. Sometimes there had never been family at all. When a patient like Margaret is actively dying, somebody should be allowed to stay. A nurse, maybe. But not always. Claire began thinking aloud. Sometimes it could be a chaplain, a trained volunteer, a retired nurse, a staff member whose time is actually protected for it. Jonathan listened. Protected, how paid? Claire's answer was immediate. Not somebody clocking out and pretending compassion happens outside labor law. Jonathan nodded. And the assigned bedside nurse can't be punished because they spent 15 minutes sitting with a patient instead of rushing to the next task. He pulled out his phone. Claire pointed at it. Are you recording me taking notes? Ask first. Jonathan put the phone down. You're right. That small response mattered more than an apology speech would have. Claire continued. You also need housekeeping. Jonathan frowned. Housekeeping? Angela knew your mother was lonely before half the clinical staff did. He remembered the sugar packets. People like Angela enter rooms when nobody important thinks anything important is happening. Claire held his gaze. If you only ask executives and doctors what patients need, you'll build another dashboard. Jonathan leaned back. For years, rooms had changed when he entered them. People prepared answers. They softened criticism. Claire seemed to become more direct every minute. He found it uncomfortable. He also suspected that was why his mother had trusted her. The conference room door opened. Patricia Collins appeared. Claire, I need you upstairs. Claire stood immediately. Coming? Jonathan rose. One more question. Claire paused. If you had authority to test this idea here, would you... Claire looked skeptical. You mean, if somebody handed me a title, number, money, compensation for your work, yes. Charity, no. That distinction caught her attention. Jonathan continued, I can change parts of Pulse Grid. St. Catherine controls staffing, but my company can fund a pilot and redesign how the platform recognizes end-of-life care. Claire shook her head. Your software isn't the only problem. I know. Hospital leadership chose how aggressively to use it. I know, then don't walk upstairs and blame Patricia. Patricia, still standing in the doorway, looked surprised. Jonathan turned toward her. I wasn't planning to. Claire looked at Patricia. She was enforcing rules she didn't create. Patricia's expression became unreadable. Claire turned back to Jonathan. If you really want to build something, the people doing the work need to design it. Agreed. Nurses, yes. CNAs, yes. Housekeeping, yes. Patients. Jonathan nodded. And families. Claire thought of Margaret, especially the ones who arrived too late. Jonathan accepted the wound without flinching. Yes. Silence followed. Then Jonathan asked, Would you help? Claire looked at the metronome. 42 years of scratches marked its wooden surface. She could almost hear Margaret. You shouldn't have to lose something to prove you care. Claire touched the casing once. I'll sit in one meeting. Jonathan smiled faintly. One. And after that, if you listen, maybe 2. Patricia gave a quiet laugh from the doorway. Jonathan picked up the metronome. Fair enough. Claire headed toward the hall. Claire. She turned. Jonathan did not thank her. Perhaps he understood that gratitude alone was too small now. Instead, he said, "I'll listen." Claire studied him for a moment. "Then start with the people nobody usually asks." She left. Jonathan remained beside the conference table holding his mother's metronome. For years, Whitmore Health Technologies had asked how many minutes hospitals could save. For the first time, its CEO was beginning with a different question. Which minutes should never have been taken away? Claire Bennett's one meeting lasted 3 hours. The second happened 9 days later. By the fourth, Patricia Collins had stopped pretending Claire was only there temporarily. "You realize you're on the committee now," Patricia said. Claire looked up from a stack of printed notes. "I specifically refused to join a committee. You've attended 4 meetings. I was tricked. You brought color-coded tabs. That proves nothing." Across the conference table, Jonathan Whitmore smiled. The room looked nothing like the executive meetings he usually attended. No catered lunch, no polished presentation, no public relations team. Around the table sat 2 bedside nurses, a CNA, Dr. Samuel Carter, Patricia Angela Morris from housekeeping, a hospital chaplain, a retired hospice nurse, 1 former patient, and the daughter of a man who had died at St. Catherine the previous year. Jonathan had taken Claire seriously. Start with the people nobody usually asks. So he had. The first proposal from Whitmore Health Technologies had been 17 pages long. Claire crossed out 12. The title alone irritated her. Integrated Compassion Resource, Optimization Initiative. Jonathan looked at his legal counsel. "I didn't name it. It sounds like a machine trying to hug somebody." Angela laughed so hard she had to put down her coffee. The name became Presence Protocol. Simple. That was Claire's rule. If a frightened family couldn't understand the program in 30 seconds, it was too complicated. The idea was equally simple. When a patient entered active end-of-life care and had no available loved one staff could activate Presence Protocol, a trained volunteer retired nurse chaplain or designated paid staff member could be assigned to sit with that person. Not provide medical treatment, not replace nurses, simply be present. More importantly, bedside staff would receive protected time for certain end-of-life needs without being penalized by efficiency metrics. Nobody would have to clock out to prove they cared. But getting the idea from a conference table into a hospital room was harder. Whitmore Health's board resisted immediately. "It increases labor exposure," one executive said during a video call. Jonathan sat at the head of the table. "So does turnover. We sell optimization. We sell healthcare infrastructure. Our clients want lower costs. They also want nurses who don't quit." Another executive leaned forward. "Are we redesigning a flagship platform because of one personal experience?" 6 months earlier, Jonathan might have hated the question. Now he respected it. No. He changed the screen. Anonymous nurse comments appeared. No time to sit with dying patient. Staffing model counts. Tasks, not emotional needs. Family distress creates workload the system doesn't recognize. These came from 11 hospitals, Jonathan said. The room became quiet. "My mother's death didn't create the problem. It made me notice it. That distinction mattered." Jonathan refused to turn Margaret into a corporate mascot. No advertisements, no emotional campaign featuring her photograph, no program named after her. Claire had insisted on that. "Your mother deserves better than becoming branding," she had told him. Jonathan agreed. At St. Catherine, another difficult conversation unfolded. Patricia and Claire stood alone after a planning session. "You defended me. Patricia was gathering abandoned coffee cups. When with Jonathan, you didn't do anything wrong. I told you to leave Margaret. You told me I couldn't work unpaid overtime. I knew she was dying." Claire watched her. Patricia placed another cup into the trash. "I used to stay. What with patience?" Patricia leaned against the table. 15 years ago. Before this job. Her voice changed. I'd sit after shift, call families myself, hold hands, do all the things they put on nursing school posters. What happened? Patricia laughed without humor. Life, 2 children, a divorce, staff shortages, double shifts, administrators asking why medication times slipped. Patients complaining because call bells went unanswered while Patricia comforted someone else. Eventually, she said, you learned that caring about everybody is a very efficient way to destroy yourself. Claire understood more than she wanted to. So you stopped? No. Patricia looked toward the hallway. I started caring faster. That sentence stayed with Claire. Patricia had not become cruel. She had become compressed. Every compassionate instinct squeezed into whatever seconds remained. I'm sorry, Patricia said. For what? For making you feel like staying with Margaret was a problem. Claire shook her head. It was a problem. Patricia looked surprised. I shouldn't have had to stay 6 unpaid hours. No. And you shouldn't have needed to break policy to let me. Patricia nodded. Claire slid a folder toward her. Join the pilot team. Patricia stared at it. You want me? You know exactly how the system fails. You also called me terrifying. You can be 2 things. Patricia laughed. Fine. The first Presence Protocol pilot began 6 weeks later on St. Catherine's 6th floor. Nothing dramatic happened. No cameras waited. No speeches were given. The first activation came at 3:12 on a Tuesday afternoon. A 78-year-old man named Harold Green was actively dying. His wife had died 9 years earlier. His daughter was driving from Richmond and would not arrive for at least 3 hours. His nurse, Maya Brooks, was already caring for 6 other patients. Under the old system, Maya would have checked Harold as often as possible while praying his daughter arrived in time. Instead, she pressed a new option on the hospital tablet. Presence request. 4 minutes later, the hospital chaplain received the alert. He entered Harold's room, pulled up a chair, and stayed. Maya continued caring for her other patients without carrying the knowledge that Harold was alone. Claire watched from the hallway. No miracle, no applause, just a chair that was no longer empty. Jonathan stood several feet behind her. Is that it? He asked. Claire looked at him. What were you expecting, fireworks? No. This is what success looks like. Jonathan watched the chaplain through the doorway. Quiet, ordinary. Almost invisible. Exactly the kind of thing his software had never been designed to value. Later that afternoon, Jonathan carried Margaret's metronome into the small training room. He placed it on a shelf. Claire noticed. You sure it shouldn't sit in my office? Why? Because I already know the story. He looked around the room. Other people need to ask why it's here. Claire wound it gently. The pendulum began moving. Tick, tick, tick. On the wall nearby, a simple printed sentence described the program, Presence is Care. Jonathan read it. My mother would have corrected the grammar. She would have corrected everything. He smiled. Then Claire's phone rang. Noah, she answered. Hey, baby, are you coming home for dinner? Claire looked at the clock. 5:48. For years, that question had often been followed by an apology. Tonight, another nurse was covering her patients exactly as scheduled. The meeting was over. Nobody was asking Claire to donate another hour of her life. Yes, she said. What time? Claire picked up her coat. On time. Noah went quiet. Then, suspiciously, actually on time, Claire laughed. Actually. She hung up and looked once more at the metronome. Margaret had been right. Goodness should not require punishment. The purpose of Presence Protocol was never to create more people willing to sacrifice themselves. It was to create fewer situations where sacrifice was the only way to be human. Claire walked toward the elevator. Behind her, the metronome kept moving. But this time, no dying woman was waiting for someone to choose between staying beside her and going home. This time, the system had finally made room for the chair. 5 months later, Claire Bennett's Honda Accord was still ugly. It was also running. Claire considered that progress. At 6:38 one Monday morning, she parked in the employee lot at St. Catherine Medical Center and turned off the engine. No warning lights, no coughing, no prayer required. The alternator had cost $512 after labor. Claire had paid for it herself. Not with a check from Jonathan Whitmore, not with a hospital fundraiser. With her paycheck, her new role as part-time clinical coordinator for Presence Protocol came with additional paid hours while she continued bedside nursing 3 shifts each week. The arrangement was not glamorous. It was sustainable. Claire preferred sustainable. Her phone buzzed. Noah, you forgot your crackers. Claire smiled. A second message appeared. I ate them. Then sorry. Claire typed, criminal. Noah replied, love you too. Claire slipped the phone into her pocket and entered the hospital. Presence protocol had not transformed American healthcare. Claire would have distrusted anyone claiming it had. St. Catherine still had difficult days. Nurses still became overwhelmed. Budgets still caused arguments. 2 hospitals approached by Whitmore Health Technologies had rejected the program because administrators considered protected presence time too expensive. Another had delayed implementation indefinitely. But 7 hospitals were testing it. And PulseGrid itself had changed. Jonathan's engineers created safeguards preventing administrators from treating bedside presence during qualifying end-of-life care as wasted labor. The system now flagged patients with high isolation risk. It created space for documented emotional and family support needs. Most importantly to Claire, it did not pretend software could replace judgment. The dashboard still counted minutes. It had simply stopped pretending every minute meant the same thing. Jonathan had faced resistance. Some investors disliked increased implementation costs. One board member openly questioned whether Jonathan had become emotionally compromised. Jonathan's answer was simple. Maybe we were emotionally absent before. He never told Claire about that conversation. Angela did. Angela somehow knew everything. At 6:49, Claire reached the 6th floor. 11 minutes early. Patricia Collins noticed immediately. Car works don't compliment her. She'll get arrogant. Patricia handed Claire a tablet. 3 admissions expected. Of course. And Maya needs you in 6:28. Claire looked up. Presence. Patricia nodded. Claire walked down the corridor. Maya Brooks, a 26-year-old CNA, stood outside room 628. Her coat was already over her scrubs. You're supposed to be leaving, Claire said. I know. What happened, Mr. Franklin? Inside lay Walter Franklin, 82, a retired postal worker with advanced lung disease. No wife. No surviving siblings. One nephew in Arizona who had not spoken to him in years. His breathing had changed 20 minutes earlier. The physician believed he had only hours. He keeps asking whether somebody's here, Maya said. Claire looked through the doorway. And I told him I was. You are. My shift ended 18 minutes ago. Claire looked at Maya's coat, then at her face. She recognized that expression. The same calculation Claire had made 5 months earlier. Job, home, money, duty, conscience. A human life compressed into a decision nobody should have to make alone. Maya lowered her voice. I don't want him waking up and seeing an empty chair. Claire remembered room 614, Margaret. The metronome slowing. Will you stay until it stops? Claire touched Maya's arm. Go home. Maya frowned. But I've got him. You're working. Exactly. Claire picked up the tablet mounted outside room 628. She selected Walter Franklin's profile, then pressed Presence Request. The notification went out. Who's coming? Maya asked. Claire checked. Eleanor Price. Maya smiled. Eleanor was a 67-year-old retired ICU nurse who volunteered twice a week. She'll stay until family comes he stabilizes, or the next volunteer takes over. Maya looked through the door. You sure? Claire smiled. Go. Maya hesitated. Then something changed in her face. Relief. She was allowed to care, and she was allowed to leave. Both could be true. 20 minutes later, Eleanor arrived carrying knitting she rarely actually knitted. She entered room 628 and introduced herself. Walter opened his eyes. You family nono. Eleanor pulled the chair closer. But I can sit a while. Walter considered that. Okay. Claire watched from the doorway. 5 months earlier, that chair would probably have remained empty unless somebody sacrificed something to fill it. Now, filling it was part of the plan. That afternoon, Claire entered the training room before a new volunteer orientation. Margaret's metronome remained on the shelf. Its wood was scratched. Its brass weight had dulled. Nobody had restored it. Claire liked it that way. Objects earned their scars too. She picked it up. Later, when Walter became restless, Claire carried it to room 628. Eleanor was still beside him. "What's that?" Walter whispered. "Something an old teacher left us." Claire wound it. Tick, tick, tick. Walter listened. His breathing slowly settled. "Sounds like a clock." "Kind of." Counting down, Claire looked at the pendulum. Once she might have said yes. Now she shook her head. Just keeping company. Near the doorway, Maya had returned briefly to retrieve a forgotten water bottle. She heard the sound. "Why do we keep that old thing around?" Claire looked at her. The question carried her backward through 5 months, to 4318. A cold coffee, a dying woman, a son racing home too late, a CEO sitting in an uncomfortable chair, 3 sugar packets, a little boy's peanut butter crackers, 6 unpaid hours, all the things no dashboard had known how to value. Claire looked at the metronome. "So we remember that every minute belongs to someone." Maya absorbed the answer, then smiled and left. At 700 that evening, Claire's shift ended. She completed handoff, checked Walter once more. Eleanor's replacement had arrived. Nobody was alone. Claire put on her coat. For once, leaving did not feel like abandoning someone. At 7:11, she walked into the parking lot. 11 minutes after her shift. Not 6 hours. Noah was waiting at home. Claire started the Honda. The engine came alive immediately. Good girl. She drove toward West Baltimore. Upstairs, Walter Franklin rested with another human being beside him. And on the table near his bed, Margaret Whitmore's metronome continued moving. Tick, tick, tick. Not counting the minutes until someone died. Reminding everyone that while a person was still here, their minutes still mattered. Some of the most important acts of kindness will never look impressive from the outside. They may be nothing more than pulling up a chair, answering a frightened question for the 5th time, saving 3 packets of sugar, or holding the hand of someone who has nobody else. But Claire's story reminds us of something deeper. Compassion should not require a person to destroy themselves in order to prove they care. We often praise people for sacrificing their sleep money, health, or family time. We call them heroes. Sometimes they are. But perhaps the better question is why being humane required a heroic sacrifice in the first place. Jonathan could have handed Claire money and walked away feeling generous. Instead, he listened. Claire did not ask to be rescued. She asked to be heard, and then used that opportunity to make things better for the people who would come after her. That is how kindness grows. Someone stays for you. Years later, you stay for someone else. And eventually, if enough people listen, we build a world where nobody has to stand alone. If someone once gave you their time when you needed it, most tell us about them in the comments. Share this story with someone who still believes small acts matter, and subscribe if you'd like to continue discovering stories about the quiet choices that can change a life. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give another person is simply this: I see you. Your time matters, and you are not alone.